Hey there, listener, and welcome to episode number 86 of the National Land Realty Podcast, where we discuss all things land. Our goal here is to inform, educate, and entertain those of you who own land or are interested in the buying and selling of land throughout the United States. My name is Mac Christian, and I am the Chief Marketing Officer here at National Land Realty. I'll be your host for this episode. Now, before we jump in today, you will notice a little bit of a difference in my appearance if you're watching the video. I did manage to shave for the first time in 3 years, so if you don't recognize me, it's still me. I'm still here. And I don't think that there's been a Samson-type thing go on. I do still think I have my podcasting powers. Shaving has not eliminated that from my skill set. So we're going to jump in. Today, we're talking about wetlands assessments and remediation. These are things that most landowners don't think about until it's too late. Sometimes you think about it right when you pick up a piece of land. You might go through a wetlands assessment. Maybe you didn't pay attention to what it was or the fact that it had already gone on, or maybe you didn't even consider the fact that you might need to do one. Again, it's something that a lot of people don't think about until it's too late, and by then it can get very, very, very expensive. So we're here today to talk with Curt Kleist. He is the CEO of CK Wetlands, and I'm going to read my notes here because his firm does a lot of things. CK Wetlands assists with wetlands assessment, delineation, permit applications, GIS services, monitoring and mitigations of wetlands, as well as tree inventories. Curt is here today to talk with us about the risks of not knowing if you have wetlands on your land, as well as how to avoid some of the pitfalls of not knowing. Now, this is something that every landowner should know about. Sit back and enjoy. All right, so I am sitting here talking to Curt Kleist. He is CEO of CK Wetlands out of Minnesota. And Curt, I just wanted you to give me a little bit of background. How did you start CK Wetlands? And you know, as the big boss there, what do you do?
Well, thanks for having me on today. So I have my own company, CK Wetlands. I kind of started out, you know, when I was younger. Grew up northern Minnesota by the Boundary Waters. Dad was a water resource professor up at Vermilion College, and kind of from there, I just really, always grew up canoeing, hunting, hiking. Kind of always had a love for the outdoors. So from there, went to University of North Dakota. I got my bachelor's of science in fish and wildlife biology. Went there after college. I did a lot of waterfowl research, seasonal jobs around the country. Was kind of into that waterfowl research route, and then kind of got offered a consulting job up in northern Minnesota. So kind of started there, and then kind of moved around at a few different firms. Got a lot of experience doing different things, and then got into wetlands, and just kind of figured I could do this on my own. So kind of started my own network, started networking with clients, and just been with my own company for probably about 6-7 years now, and just getting busier every year, and things been going well. So yeah.
And you were located, I want to say Chisholm, Minnesota, but that's probably is it Chisholm? How's it?
Chisholm. No,
Is it
you had
Chisholm?
it right. Yeah. So
Okay.
Chisholm. Yeah. So it's So it's on the Iron Range. That's kind of where I'm based out of, and it's a pretty good general location. And we do projects primarily all over the Midwest, primarily Minnesota, but really, I mean, I've done wetland work in probably half the states. So I've kind of been all over doing projects, kind of wherever, depending on the project size and wherever the work takes me. So kind of up in Iron Range, northern Minnesota. That's kind of where we're based out of. So
Okay. And so you move from waterfowl research and field research into wetlands, just wetlands work in general. What took you there, and like how did you end up specifying in wetlands, and then we can kind of jump into what you work with in particular, and then because obviously we were talking before, and we're going to take the conversation into what landowners should look for or be concerned with, and what they can fix and what they can't. But I wanted you to take me into how do you go from the sort of the biology field research side to wetlands mitigation and work?
Yeah. So I was, I was doing a lot of waterfall research down in the Gulf Coast, Louisiana, Florida, Nevada, Illinois, North Dakota, Minnesota, kind of all over. And a lot of those waterfall research jobs are kind of that summer seasonal job. And I was kind of between jobs, and kind of had a friend of my dad offer me a position with kind of back home in Iron Range, and it was kind of a good timing. And I was like, oh, this is looks like I never even knew what a wetland delineation was or any of that. So that's kind of how I got kind of groomed into it, and I got out as just a field assistant on some mining projects with older gentlemen, and kind of got me groomed in and trained me in, and then yeah, kind of just took it from there, and um, moved around with a few different engineering firms, consulting firms, small, large, and then yeah, just kind of took it from there on my own. So if you like doing what you're doing, and figured it's kind of easy enough, and um, if you really have a dedication, a passion for the field, you can really make it happen. So
So you ended up landing with a mentor, and I like to joke and call it the graybeard discount. It's like if you listen, you can get 30 years of experience from in just a short amount of time.
yeah,
Finding good mentorship is key.
yeah, that's really the key. I've been doing now a lot of with a field assistance on some prior employment jobs I had and stuff. But yeah, when you get out really with, you can do all the, whether wetland training or in classroom, and but it's really that out in the field where you're looking at the soil, looking at the plants. The hands-on learning is, I mean, you can take a years of class and one field season doing that, so you can really take it all in and really learn from some of the best, and get kind of their aspect and how they do things. And I never do things the same, and you take a little bit from your whole route on life, and take a little bit in and kind of shape things kind of how you want to, whether data collection or reports or GIS or anything. So
Gotcha.
but yeah,
So CK Wetlands, how long have you been established?
um about 2018, so yeah, 5 6 years now.
Yeah, you're
So
breaking that mark. You're getting to that
yeah,
stage where, what is it? Most companies don't make it past their 5 year mark kind of thing. Like you're
yeah,
established now.
yep. So but yeah, I've been about 5 years kind of full time, and was kind of doing part time a little bit before that. But yeah, it's been just busier and busier um than ever. So it's been going excellent, really good.
So tell me a little bit about CK Wetlands, and from this, if somebody's listening, then this is probably going to be pretty typical of a wetlands research firm that somebody would be working with, and in particular yours. Tell me just sort of like what you do for clients and sort of your service offerings.
Yeah, so when people are looking at properties, whether it's a realtor, developer, private person, if they're looking at properties, and there's environmental issues or wetlands out there, or wildlife issues, or just general site feasibility development, they could contact me. So we do wetland delineations as our primary aspect. Do assessments like initial desktop reviews. Uh, we also do some forestry inventories, just general like site planning and development out there. So uh, yeah, in essence, like a delineation is, uh, we go out and do a legal boundary, look at the soils, the vegetation, the hydrology, and really find that line between the wetland boundary and the upland. Which we use there's an 87 Army Corps of Engineer manual that kind of determines our methodology for sampling, data collection, report, and regulatory review. So so yeah, people. I mean, if realtors are people are looking at a property, don't know what's out there, I can usually do a initial like site view, whether I mean, anywhere in the country, we have GS layers that are out there that you can look and say, uh, really look at and get a pretty good ballpark approximate of if there's wetlands out there, the likelihood. I mean, like there's some areas where, I'm not really, I don't really think there's any wetlands out there, but you really aren't going to know unless you're in the field. But, some areas where you can see it on the aerial imagery. You got open water or drowned out crop. You can see, there's probably wetlands out there. So and every site's a little different, kind of varies, but those are kind of some of the things that we'll look for.
Is it a process of, so when you're looking at GIS layer, like you're looking at, where water tables are, what the elevation of that area is, types of soil composition, that kind of thing. When you're going about this process, does GIS handle the bulk of it, or is it just the first stage? Because I would imagine that just because GIS looks like something doesn't always mean that the soil matches.
No, and we can get to that. The soil survey is a real general, approximate boundary. It's not like real high detail delineated. It's used at a kind of a larger scale of different soil types. From the soils you can get, you can say, oh, there's a high frequency of ponding, high frequency of flooding, the depth to water table, slope. I mean, those are kind of some of the things you get from the soils. But yeah, GIS is really our initial like pre-planning phase. I'll look at the site. I mean, a lot of times before we do proposals and start working with somebody, that's the first thing I'll look at is I'll pull in the state GIS layers of some NWI elevation, the FEMA layers. Look at Google Earth Pro. You can pull in historical imagery quick, see how the site has changed. And yeah, it's really like the initial site planning, what's actually out there, and say, and usually I can do a sketch map and say, well, there's definitely wetland here. There's question mark here. That looks pretty upland here. So kind of give them areas that, that there's definitely wetland there. And you're never 100% sure, unless you get out there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've been doing it long enough. I can usually get a pretty good idea out there.
So for those that have not been around it, I want to play some definition games with you here. I'd like you to define the differences between assessment, delineation, and mitigation. Because it's one of those things too. As a marketer, I run into this all the time. Phrases that I'm really used to, others are not necessarily. I say something like SEO or something like that, or cost per click or something to somebody like that, and their eyes cross. So for those out there that have not dealt directly with those three things from somebody like yourself, I was wondering if you could give us a definition.
Sure. And I'll even add one more on there for you. So
Perfect.
So the first step would be like a desktop review. So like a wetland desktop mapping review. So I'll just look at the sites, pull in some GIS layers that I have, take a look, get a quick little basically desktop assessment on the computer. Don't have to be out to the site, and just say, okay, here's wetlands here. I can make polygons and map out the boundary where I think. From that, a lot of times people that are looking at buying property, they want me to go out there and just GPS approximate boundary, which often I can do in the winter or outside the growing season. So I can just go out in the field, GPS, do a quick little boundary, maybe not even flag it, and then just create a map for them. So that's more of a wetland assessment, where I just have a map. It's not a regulatory approval of boundaries, pretty cut and dry. And then the delineation is it's a full report. There's a map set. It's a lot more detailed on the report. And you really look at a high detail on finding that wetland boundary. You're looking at for hydric soils, hydrophytic vegetation, and any kind of hydrology indicators. So we go out and flag it. We'll ID the flags, make our boundary, make our wetland map, and depending on whether you want a jurisdictional determination or a legal defined approved wetland delineation, you usually submit that to the regulators. So it's more state specific, but traditionally Army Corps of Engineers is always involved, and the DNR or the state regulatory agencies and local like SWCDs or other government like state specific entities. So they'll go out and do either do a review on the desktop, they give you a stamp and approval on it, or they may do a site visit. So it's called a technical evaluation panel, a TEP panel. They may go out there and do a site visit. Any adjustments, but usually they'll give you a stamp approval on it, and then that's boundaries legally good for 5 years for development purposes. So if you start doing any development past that 5 years, a lot of times you have to get them updated. And then mitigation. So if they have any more state specific, but if you're impacting any wetlands, you have to go through a mitigation wetland replacement plan. You'd be basically you're buying wetland credits to offset the impacts that you're occurring. There is certain exemptions where you're exempt from certain activities or small impacts, utility, small private development. That's you get a little more higher detail there, but it's yeah, there is other alternatives for that. But yeah, so hope that.
And then permitting has to do with, is that just part of the process that you go through if you have wetlands, or are there any particulars that you have to get specialized permits for?
Yeah, so if people are impacting wetlands or looking at impacts, so yeah, the first step is getting a delineation there. You have your wetland boundary mapped. You know, you know what type of wetland and where they are, and then if you're gonna impact wetlands, once you have your kind of your site design, you overlay your road development, and then you have your square footage and how many acres you're impacted. Yeah, from that you kind of submit a permit application. We prepare those, and then yeah, you look at it like basically buying credits to offset wetland impacts.
Gotcha. Okay. So from a high level, is it something where anybody looking to develop, and anyone anywhere, or in particular people looking to develop in lower lying elevations should be looking at wetlands, or is it just anywhere all the time that people should be looking at that?
I think anywhere all the time you should always looking for wetlands. I mean, there's wetlands, sloped wetlands, high elelands. I mean, there's definitely the lower you are on either the floodplain or the kind of the general landscape position. I mean, if you're at that foot slope of a hill, or the flood, you're near a creek too. There's there's different types of wetlands too. So there's higher quality wetlands like a coniferous bog or a coniferous swamp. Those take thousands of years to develop versus a wet meadow or stuff of that entity. They can get developed a lot more. So there's different higher quality of wetland, and but yeah, definitely that's something you want to look at, is that especially where you're sitting on the geographic landscape.
During the process, so when and we're looking at this from the perspective of somebody who's developing, or even just a homeowner buying some land, how often do you go into a situation where there's not a sort of like a Army Corps of Engineers identified wetlands that you discover a wetlands?
Half the time, probably, at least. I mean, there's a lot of instances where I hear from kind of landowners a lot. Well, it gets a little softer in the spring. It's not too bad, but then it dries out later in the year. And usually when they usually people underestimate how many wetlands are actually out there. So yeah, I mean, you can, we'll always do a site review. I'll kind of just look at my GS sources and see what's, where I think the wetlands are. And usually there's a lot more than what most people think, or there's one little wetland in the north, but the county says I need a delineation or something. And usually there's a lot more that are out there, and people are unpleasantly surprised how many wetlands are out there. Because
unpleasantly, yeah. So it could be the case where you buy a property, there's an area where it's a little soggy, but you put your road through there to get to your house, your driveway, or even where you put your house, and you could find out later that you're in a whole heap of a mess.
Yeah, I'm going through a couple projects like that recently, but yeah, people are oftentimes, people, if you don't do that initial site planning and you get caught per se, or didn't know it was a wetland, something of that aspect. Yeah, you're usually either paying. So traditionally, when you go through like a wetland placement plan or mitigation, you buy credits at like a 1-to-1 ratio. So if you're impacting 1,000 square feet of wetland, you'd buy 1,000 square feet of wetland credits. So if you a lot of times if you do it after the fact, they call it's a 2-to-1 ratio. So you'd be paying twice as much versus, if you didn't do that, plus whether it's either local or state, fines as well. So it's definitely a lot more expensive on the back end. I mean, you're better off to do the initial site planning uh, beforehand and find out, oh, I didn't know it was a wetland, or kind of, you know. So yeah, it's definitely one of those cases.
And how expensive can this get if somebody has not identified a wetlands? Let's go with the 2-to-1 ratio. If somebody discovers after the fact, and they get hammered with a fine for credits, and to specify, and this is my assumption, I'm gonna shoot in the dark here, that your wetlands credits are used to go into funding wetlands protection.
Yeah. So, well, for example, like in Minnesota, we have wetland banks across the state in different watersheds, and using your buying credits, you try to find it closest to the site, but definitely within the same watershed. So essentially, they're areas that they've created more wetlands that were historically or previously in upland areas. So we've created more wetlands. So in Minnesota, we have a 91 Wetland Conservation Act that was created, and basically the goal of it is no net loss of wetlands, which we try to do. So if, like, for example, somebody put a road in and impacted 10,000 square feet of wetlands, depending on what watershed you're at and where in the state you are, and supply, just like anything, supply and demand. I mean, they can set their prices higher and lower. You could, I mean, in general, where I'm at, it's about $1 a square foot. So if you're impacting 10,000 square feet, you're putting the road in, you're paying about 10,000 for buying those mitigation credits. So, but again, if different parts of the country, different parts of the state, I mean, that number could be, for, instead of $1 a square foot, it could be easily $2-3 a square foot. So it really varies a lot by state, county, watershed, really how many banks are out there too. So you have a higher supply. I mean, there's a lot more out there. Use the price drops, but you got some areas or some cities, counties, watersheds that there's not a whole lot of credits over there. People are fighting for them. They can up their prices a lot more. If that makes sense.
No, it does. I mean, what we're clarifying here is that it could get very expensive. Like if you impact a high value watershed in an area where it's in high demand, you could be facing some really serious financial consequences. Is that a year thing, or is it a one-time thing?
No, that's a one-time fee.
Okay.
So yeah, you go through the permitting process, and there's certain thresholds too. If you get, traditionally for the Army Corps, if you get over a half an acre of impact, it'll trigger a lot more. It'll trigger a section like 401. So you get a lot more like wildlife surveys and other ecological. So yeah, and then again, then too, rather just a general permit, yeah, that would go through an individual permit. So a lot longer review process on those. But yeah, it definitely can get very expensive on the back end if you don't do your initial planning before. That's what I always tell folks. A lot of people don't want to do that initial planning, especially you're looking at buying property, or it's a tax forfeit. Oh, it's a good deal. I got a property, and then find out, oh, it's all wetland and there's nothing you can do with it. So.
And it's not just the wetland itself, right? It's the buffer zone as well, right? Is that matters
Yeah.
as well?
Yep. And that's a lot of times that's states, like county, local ordinances, but yeah, they'll have certain setbacks from whether a drainage, if it's a DNR water course, the kind of the stream status. But yeah, there's certain buffer setbacks from those, or yeah, and some counties too have setbacks like directly from the wetland too. So even though, I got my wetland delineation mapped, but you still got to stay, let's say 40 feet from the buffer of the wetland, even if you're not touching it. There's certain setbacks from there, or bluff setbacks from a larger lake, or things of that matter. So, and yeah, that's kind of all the whole site planning too. I mean, you get those setbacks from, if you're in a small development, community too, you got certain setbacks, structure setbacks, road setbacks from the neighbors, depending on, if it's a larger highway too, you got to be, and then really kind of fine tune your buildable site area. And those are kind of things that help clients to plan with too. So
curiosity question. When you've, let's say you've gone through the process, you've got your build window, 5 years, you broke ground, you're good, you're gonna make deadline. Uh, 10 years from now, 15 years now from now, could the wetland boundary shift?
yes, yeah, the wetland boundary could definitely shift, but that's why they only do the delineation valid for 5 years
5 years.
because you have a higher rain certain years. And that's another thing we kind of look at is the antecedent precipitation. So how wet or dry it's been when we're doing the delineation, and then if you get, and that's based on like a 30-year average, excuse me. So yeah, if you have a lot of years that where it's been really, really wet, that wetland could really increase. But yeah, when you go through the permitting process, it's at the current site conditions for that year. So, but yeah, the things definitely change. You get new roads that come in, new developments, just the whole fluctuation of the water kind of, things will change over the course. So
So
yeah.
so when you're talking about impact, right? If you are impacting a wetlands, that's when you incur fines. I was curious about what constitutes impact. Is it like, so you were talking about a road, and is it you built on top of the wetland, or is it that the dust from the road is settling into the wetland? And is it pretty vague, or is it there's a clear definition of like this is an impact?
Yeah, I mean, it's traditionally it's any kind of fill, excavating, or altering of hydrology is what I tell people.
Okay,
We don't see too much of that dust out here. I mean, you get a few of the, we're a pretty big taconite mining community. But yeah, we don't see that like the real big dust too much out here. But yeah, really any kind of, I mean, fill. If you're um, putting in a road, you got class 5 clay. I mean, overlaid on the wetland, that's an impact. If you're altering like the hydrology, so if you're especially in agriculture areas, if you're tiling the wetland and changing the whole drainage pattern to really dry out the wetland, and any excavating. I mean, you're excavating, digging up the soil and the dirt within the wetland. Yeah, that would definitely classify as impact. And we have like state specific in Minnesota too. We have a lot of tree debris. We got people that'll cut trees and stack up piles of them and just let them sit there. And so that's recently new impact for here. But yeah,
oh,
those are
is that tannins, or is it just blockage of wetlands?
well, if you're like harvesting timber, cutting a lot of county. I mean, you can cut cut the trees, the shrubs, but if you chip them and have a whole chip pile or a tree pile that's X amount how many high. I mean, and they just sit there years after years. Some people can use that and say, "Oh, I'm going to put a structure on there or something." So that's yeah, it's kind of one of those things that's more state specific. That's why it's never just okay. The federal level, state level, and then like different local ordinances have vegetation removal, vegetation management plans, and things of that matter.
Gotcha. And you had brought up before you would put together some things for topic wise, and you had brought up GIS layers of note. So GIS layers to pay attention to. Is this for the general public, or is this just stuff that you work with?
Um, Really both. I mean, a lot of those layers are just, I mean, public available layers. Whether it's a GIS county explore like land explorer. I mean, most of us use the Onyx. We see all the cool layers, approximate property boundaries on there. Um, and sometimes they have a wetland layer on there, or they have the topography. But yeah, those are really some of the things that I'll look at. I mean, first thing I'll do, I'll pull up the NWI. So that's the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, has the National Wetland Inventory. Um, it really shows like kind of larger wetland complexes. Some states have their own wetland inventory that's pretty much mirrored or close to those. Um, and then kind of from there, I'll go to like a soil survey. And usually the USDA has a soil survey, which really shows you a lot of um, attributes of the soil. Whether it's like is it drain good? What's the depth of the water table for each layer? Frequency, flooding, ponding, and really like the big thing I'll look at there is it'll say a hydric soil type by percentage. So you can go from like non-hydric, predominantly non-hydric, uh, predominantly hydric to hydric. So if there's 5 different classes on it, if it's really all showing up as hydric, there's probably some high probability of wetlands in there. And yeah, and you can pull up. I mean, there's other like you can really go into detail on the imagery, the FEMA, the flooding. Uh, I think another good one is a Google Earth. Most of us probably use that, and you can pull up the imagery, and then on there too, you can get a quick historical. Just you can on the top there's a scroll icon. You can really just go back and pull up a quick aerial imagery on what the conditions were like, especially in like dense forest areas of you got a lot of hardwood trees. So I try to find a lot of those that have a leaf off, like in a spring or winter imagery, and then from that you can really see any kind of drainages or either saturation under the trees. I mean, those are some real good things. But yeah, those are really the main layers that I'll use. I mean, there's like state streams. A lot of counties have their own drainages, streams, rivers. But yeah, those are really, and I really think like probably the elevation and the LiDAR is probably, I would say, one of the most important, at least to me when I'm looking at sites. I mean, if you have some elevation out in the site too, you can really see where that water is going to flow. Certain kind of small, high detail breaks, you can kind of see of where the likelihood of the wetland is going to be. Or if you see a wetland and you see kind of all those topographies kind of sloping up, there's maybe a ephemeral drainage there or a stream coming through, or I mean, if it's real flat and you got a wetland, a lot of times those NWI boundaries are there's typically out a little more than that. There's usually a lot more wetlands out there. But again, if there's an NWI on their map, that's something I'll definitely go out and look, do the delineation, do a data point on, really find those areas to look at in more detail. But those are really a good start. And yeah, most of those, I mean, I can send some people some links, but yeah, most of those you can go on these explorers and just, at least either Google those or find those pretty easy. I mean, NWI is what I tell most people. That's a good U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Just Google that, and you can find that. That's a good place to start from there. So,
awesome. And you were talking about like if somebody's purchasing land, it's best to do wetlands research. And I want to throw this out there because we didn't specifically say it. Do you want to do it before you buy the property, or do you want to do it before you build? Because those are two separate things to somebody buying land.
yeah, I haven't. I've had it both ways. I've had and I've had kind of some in between too. Like if somebody's looking at selling and somebody else is looking at buying, they'll almost split the price on a delineation on it. Whether if it's beneficial for them to do it, it's kind of one of those things where it's like like selling a property and you're buying it. I mean, it's really goes both ways. I think the majority of the time it's usually once somebody buys it, they do the delineation or get a wetland assessment, environmental assessment of that matter. But sometimes I people that are looking at buying a property. Well, I want to spend that a small portion before I spend all that money on purchasing a property on the delineation. Find out do the initial kind of site feasibility on it and say, wow, there's a lot more wetlands out there. I think it's probably not the right property for me. Maybe I'll look at something else.
Yeah,
that's why those desktop reviews are pretty good, because those are pretty low cost, quick and easy that I can do, and I can give you a good general. Here's your boundary. There's definitely a lot of wetlands. That whole area is probably wetlands. You got a lot of drainages coming through. Is it and especially access to and utilities. Where's the power going to go? Where's your road going to go? If you have any water or sewer out there too, where do you want your building? What's your initial kind of plans of the property? That's what I ask a lot of people right away too. So,
gotcha. Yeah, and I wanted to ask that because I mean, for me, if I'm buying land, I probably want to know beforehand. But the other side of that is, for property owners looking at selling. Like we work with a lot of property owners, and the consensus across every agent that you talk to across the country is like, if you really want to move your property and you want to make sure that you maximize what you're going to get out of it, get things established beforehand. So if you can establish like your roadways, building site possible areas, identifying wetlands, so that when you go to sell, you've got all this stuff laid out in front of you. And it does take legwork, and it takes, money off the front end, right? It's not everybody's favorite thing. You can structure that into the sale of the property though, and get all that stuff identified to where it is plug and play, ready to go, turnkey, and that's going to maximize the possibility that you can sell the land. But for landowners too, it's like, if it's not there, it's buyer beware, right? Like you could buy something. So you brought up an example, right, where somebody bought something, then they can't do anything with it after they bought the land because it's all wetlands. Have you encountered things like that?
Yeah, I had one recently, like that. It was, somebody bought a property, bought a 40, 100% wetland. I mean, it was, almost anybody could tell it was wetland. It might be one of those where they didn't just buy it without being out there. Pretty much open bog. I mean, it was like, it's clearly wetland, and they tried doing some exemptions with it. You know, for that property in Minnesota, we have up to 10,000 square feet. You can potentially, have your site plan and impact that much without going through a replacement plan in that part of the state. That exemption gets a little tough to define sometimes and tell people, but yeah, they couldn't really get their the whole site and housing, and there was a large, it was near a bigger highway, so they had to have like a 45-foot setback from the road, so you got to have that much more impact on there, and it just kind of fell. It's one of those that just kind of fell through. But that's kind of the first one that pops in my head, and you just really can't, you really can't say that. What was that? And that's kind of one of the things that we look for, is to how to at least minimize your impact. What other kind of alternatives have you explored? I mean, was it the best site there? Are there other sites nearby that there's probably less wetlands? And the answer is probably yes. I mean, it wasn't probably the most feasible property, and I think they just kind of moved on to something else. So and it does happen too. You have other people that especially when you have properties and you have good upland sites and good areas to build at, and a lot of times people want to, well, I want that in the wetlands near the lake, and I want my house right by the lake and that good view of the lake. And that's not always the case. And I mean, have you done everything you can to minimize the impacts, or look at other alternatives? Is there better options out there on the property? So so sometimes those economic or aesthetic considerations aren't always aren't always best supported in those decisions from the regulators. So
and you just brought up a new term. I feel like there should be like an alert button that pops up as people listen to this, like, we have a new term. So you brought up replacement plan. What is a replacement plan, and how does that involve?
Yeah, so that's kind of what we work with for like any kind of mitigation, is like we go through a replacement plan. That's kind of a lot of attachments, and the permit application for purchasing the wetland credits to offset the impacts that the property owners impacting, or the client. So kind of some of the things we always try to do is say, well, have you met sequencing? So this per the regulations, so the sequencing, have you done everything you can to avoid wetland impacts as much as possible. And the second thing is, like, what have you done to minimize the impacts? So if those impacts can't be avoided, how have you done to minimize it? So a lot of times, for, let's say, road developments, if you started with a 20-foot road, can you kind of narrow that road down to, let's say, a 14-foot, and show your culverts, keep that hydrology in line. Or if you initially have your, for housing development, if you have it situated, could you reconfigure your site plan, rotate it, or pretty much anything in that aspect. And then if you can't avoid and minimize, then you go through the replacement plan and replace any impacts that can't be are offsetted. So, yeah, those are kind of things that, for the replacement plan. And there's, we include like a draft purchase agreement on there, and sometimes we'll do like a state specific in kind of botanical, special ecological features on there. And we'll do a proposed impact map. We have alternatives map on there, kind of things of that matter. So sometimes they're getting pretty detailed depending on the project, and other times, they're not too overly, but yeah, it kind of really depends on how many impacts you're having. I mean, if you're getting just kind of like local general permit where your impacts are, I mean, essentially under 10,000 square feet. But if you
I
get
gotcha.
those, I mean, impact on a couple acres, I mean, I tell people, even if you're looking at impacts, I mean, really should be planning about a year out. But a lot of times, you get those calls in late fall, and I'm trying to, you get some calls from clients, and it's kind of like, well, it's probably not happening this year, and especially up in northern Minnesota here, we our growing season. So the delineation, that's another thing too, is delineations need to be completed during the growing season. So
Okay.
that's per the 87 Army Corps delineation manual. So yeah, up here, I mean, some years it's middle of May before we can start delineations, and then we're done, early October. But yeah, and then other parts of the country, down south, we can do them definitely a lot longer, almost 10 months out of the year. So
What's the worst situation that you've encountered we'll say for the landowner, not necessarily for yourself, because I'm sure that you get complications during the course of any project. What's the worst thing that you've come up on as far as working with a client?
like impacts, or
Like
like,
nightmare
well,
scenario for the client.
uh yeah, there's sometimes where somebody put a development in, and right through what we call in Minnesota like a type H. So it's like a really like an open bog, coniferous bog. They're the most protected. So a lot of our impacts, for the exemptions, they're a lot less. But yeah, some of those we've had, there's a couple that stand out, but yeah, there's kind of one, and it's just like right through the bog. Oh, I didn't know it was wetland, and they had all their garage started and everything all going, and um, probably a neighbor or somebody, complained, and there's a complaint to the regulators, and after $30,000, $50,000 later, I have to buy credits or I have to restore it. But even restoring the whole, let's say, a road or impact is, I mean, going to cost quite a bit as well. So where's that line of, either have like a restoration order. So a lot of times the DNR they'll issue like a restoration order, so they usually have to
Yeah.
restore it or go through a mitigation replacement plan. But yeah, there's a couple that kind of stand out, but yeah, they're
Talking a good chunk of change if when something
yeah.
happens. What are some of what's best case scenario where you are able to identify, like, just what, because you work with a lot of projects. What are the kind of ideal scenarios where you can help somebody out?
Um, yes, like I think probably the ideal scenario is we have a property, there's wetlands on there, but there's clearly like upland areas or buildable areas, let's say in the back. So they have to either cross that wetland, or let's say the wetlands there, rather than putting the road straight through, maybe they can push their road a little bit more to the east, avoid the wetland, maybe have a longer driveway, but they'd avoid the wetland. And then, I don't even have to go through you know, I don't even have to go through any mitigation. You just go out and do a pretty quick, dry, and easy delineation. And a lot of times they'll do like we'll call it like a level 1 delineation. So I call that like a desktop review, where I'll just look at that, like I was talking about before. Where a level 2 is kind of the field aspect, and the regulatory review. So a lot of times usually is level 1, level 2. But yeah, I think if you can go out there and say, well, I found wetlands, but they can clearly avoid them, no impacts at all, and they have a buildable site. good area for the septic, utilities, all right there, then kind of it's a win-win. And it's like, well, that looks like a good property. I think I'll purchase that. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's definitely, and that's what's satisfying for me too, is I can, help clients and see those good projects go through. And versus, you get some of those where it's all wetland, and it's like, I feel bad. And, they're after the fact, they impact it. And, you try to do as much as you can, but, at the same time, you're working for the client, but, you're working for the wetlands too. So you're kind of in that happy medium between the two.
So we've established a few things here, right? Like we've established that one, if you're looking at buying a property, you should do a wetland study. If you're looking at selling a property, a wetland study is going to help you get established to go to sale faster and with less hassle. That wetlands can shift. So you want to do it whether you had something done 20 years ago or not, you're still going to want to have that done. That there are ways to solve it if there are wetlands, but there are cases where you can't. So that's why it's good to talk to somebody like you. You also established that if there are wetlands, somebody like you can help somebody formulate a plan to either A, do mitigation, meaning you're going to pay, or B, reroute your setup, reroute your development to where you're rerouting roads, you're rerouting building locations to where you're not paying those fines. So overall, you're a friend to anybody looking to buy or sell land. And it's something that everybody buying or selling land should work with, because it doesn't matter what elevation you're at. Wetlands can be high or low.
Yeah, wetlands are, yeah, yeah, I hit it spot on there. I mean, wetlands are, all over the country. High, low, sloped wetlands, agricultural wetlands, forested, floodplain. I mean, pretty much you name it. Last time I checked, I don't know if there's a county in the country that, didn't have any wetlands.
Yeah. So I want to give you an opportunity for your sales spiel, man. Like hit us with where do you work with people? Where's your specialty areas? And what do you you have a niche area that you work with more than others?
Yeah, I mean, if people are looking at properties, whether you're just bought one or initially, well, there's a couple properties out there, I'm not sure what's out there, even just reach out and I can give you a quick little kind of my 2 cents of what I think of the property, where you'll see issues. Yeah, definitely my specialty is delineations. That's the primary focus, and that's really what kind of kicks things off. Yeah, and really from that, you can kind of, once you have your delineation, your wetlands regulatory marked, really from that you can work on the site development and what kind of, where your buildable, usable land is, and then look at any kind of boundary setbacks or other issues, septic, utilities, really from that, which I work on that stuff, as well. So I mean, per se, I'm kind of in that mix between wetland scientist, engineer, trying to find the legal jargon for developments and pretty much everything. But yeah, I mean, if you need like a level 1 delineation on the desktop or like a level 2 in field, I mean, yeah, we work with projects kind of really all over the country. So yeah.
I think that is, yeah, pretty much anywhere, anyhow, anytime you can work with them. Awesome, man. That is a lot of really good information for landowners. I really appreciate it. Yeah, then make sure to check out CK Wetlands. I will have your link in the show notes, and make sure that if people want to get a hold of you that they can. Again, Curt Kleist with CK Wetlands. Really appreciate your time, man.
Okay, well, thank you very much for having me, and yeah, I really appreciate it. So it's always good to talk about wetlands and development. So thank you very much.
Agreed, man. Thank you. This concludes episode number 86 for the National Land Realty Podcast with Curt Kleist of CK Wetlands, discussing wetlands assessment and mitigation. You can learn more about land ownership and the buying and selling of land at nationalland.com.